Everton looks set to sign Tyrique George from Chelsea, but what does this actually mean for Everton and how we look to play? To understand this, we're going to be looking at Tyrique George's versatility, what he actually offers on the pitch, and how this affects Everton's playing style moving forward, and all the different ways that he could fit in to Everton's tactical setup. To start with, Tyrique George is an incredibly versatile player. You can see in this graphic here that he's played on the left, he's played through the middle, he's played on the right, he's even played in midfield during his academy time at Chelsea. And we're going to start with that because his versatility is quite an important factor and it's going to be an important theme throughout this video. Let's take a look at how he plays for England under 21s where he shines consistently. So in this game, if you look at the lineup, on paper, he started as a central striker in a 4-2-3-1, the same formation that Everton use. But if you look deeper and look at the average positions combined with heat maps, you can see that he drifted off to the left quite a few times during this game and mainly stayed there to get the ball. I singled out this game because he scored in this game, and if you look at his shot map, you can see that most of his shots, if not all of them, come from that left-hand side of the box. However, you can also see that he plays as a right winger for England as well. And when he plays on the right, you can see that he mainly does stay on the right-hand side of the pitch. And when we look at the footage and how he plays, this becomes an important thing to remember, that he's got positional flexibility as well as discipline. Because in this game, he got an assist, and from the right-hand side, he can be incredibly creative. Listen, let's look at the facts. He's been used sparingly at Chelsea, mainly playing in cup competitions, specifically the Conference League last season for Chelsea, because Chelsea obviously have so many wingers and they keep buying more, which just pushes Tyrique George down the pecking order. But what's important to remember is that he's come through Chelsea's academy, and you speak to any coach here in London, you will notice that they all say one thing: players who make it out that Chelsea academy and graduate into senior football and make it into the first team are incredibly talented footballers. So whilst he may not be given the chance at Chelsea, that doesn't actually mean he's not worth signing. And as an 18-year-old last season in the Conference League, he started 8 times. During that time, he got 2 goals and 1 assist. This season in the EFL Cup, he scored twice and got an assist from only 3 games. So now we're going to take a look at what that actually means, how he gets his goals, how he gets assists, and why his dribbling makes this all possible. Let's start with him as a striker through the middle, because even though he's a natural winger, he does play up front quite a lot, and he does it for Chelsea, he does it for England, because he's quite effective there, but he's effective in a non-conventional way. Because with a striker, you expect them to be here, playing on the last line. This is where we'd see Tieno Barry or Beto naturally gravitate to, trying to pin a centre-back. But because Tyrique George is a player that likes the ball to his feet and likes to get his head up when he's on the ball, he naturally gravitates towards the ball, drifting away from the defensive line. However, this doesn't really get in the way of him taking shooting opportunities, because he's quite an unapologetic shooter of the ball. He will just shoot when he feels like the moment is right, and that does see him get a lot of goals like this one here. And this one against Esperance in the Club World Cup, a game I actually watched the whole of it because I was working on that competition. I noticed that he does this one thing. He doesn't really look to drive into space rapidly when he's not got the ball. He actually takes his time to get into a space that allows him to take a shot early. And by slowing down, he makes that space for himself without actually having to lose a defender, because they're all concentrated on the ball and the player in possession. And then Tyrique George looks to target this space. And look at his body position after his first touch here. Look at where his eyes are pointing. They're not looking at the ball. He's looking straight for the goal because he already knows what he wants to achieve, and then he laces the ball, but the placement of the shot is all down to the technique, because you can see his left foot, his standing foot, he's placed it so close to the ball, it allows him to use his right foot, his stronger foot, to then strike through the ball with power, and in doing so he hits it early, and that makes it very difficult for the goalie. Even though the goalie should have saved it, the shot makes it more difficult because he does take it early, the goalkeeper can't set himself, and then that forces mistakes like this one to occur. Again, here, you would expect a striker to be trying to make this move in behind. However, Tyrique George just stays central and waits for the ball to come to him. It's almost like he's got that sixth sense, it's hard to say with a lisp, to find the space and to predict where the ball is going to fall. And again, it's that unapologetic shooting that he just hits it first time without thinking. It's a nightmare for goalkeepers, and the way he hits it with power but also precision makes it very difficult for goalies to react in time because they don't expect it to happen. Reece James is in possession here and he looks to shoot, and this is important when it comes to Tyrique George because we've talked about him maybe not having those natural instincts to make runs in behind as a striker. However, he does have that poacher ability to follow shots in, and he gets a goal from that. And this is something that will add 5 or 10 goals a season, if you're lucky, with following up on shots. And that's a good positive for him, especially if we look to utilize him down the middle. You can see him already getting onto the end of a shot parried by the goalkeeper after James Garner has taken a shot from outside the box. Tyrique George, though, is more than just a goal scorer, because he's also got assists to his game. And I've got 3 different examples here of him doing it on the left, him doing it through the middle, and him doing it on the right hand side of the pitch. And these are all important because they're going to show us how he's going to set up at Everton and where he's actually going to play. This is the example of him playing up front. Reece James is in the midfield here, and he passes it backwards to Tosin Adarabioyo. It's hard to say. And then Tosin plays a vertical ball through the middle to guess who? Tyrique George, who comes and looks for the ball to feet, and then you have the turn. This turn is so sharp, it makes it very difficult for defenders to smother him because they know he can turn them because he's quite fleet-footed when he receives the ball. And after that, he doesn't drive with the ball, he actually looks to release it quickly, and he's got that speed of thought that he can see these pictures moving, and he knows where his teammates are going to be, and he slips it through to guess who? Kieran Dewsbury-Hall, who gets a goal. And you can see that how that could possibly work at Everton with Tyrique George coming to feet, with Dewsbury-Hall making that counter run in behind. And we're going to talk about that in a second as well. This next one is an example of him being effective on the right-hand side of the pitch, but he actually starts in the middle. But this is by design, because he starts in the middle to then move out into a wider position. And once he moves wide, he gets the ball in space. But look at his head again. He's not looking at the ball. He's actually got his head up, looking for potential passing opportunities so he can make that decision early and find a teammate. And from there, he shows positivity, beating the defender with a quick step over to get to that space towards the byline, before then pulling it back to Cucurella, who he spotted earlier, because he knows once he beats that defender, Cucurella is still going to be in that general area which he saw him earlier, meaning that he can play that ball without hesitation and get another assist. This is an example of him playing on the left wing for Chelsea's under-21s against Ajax, and the ball gets absolutely fired into him. There's a lot of power and a lot of pace on this ball. Most players would look to take a touch to settle the ball before then getting their head up, and by that time the defender from Ajax, in this case, would have pressed him and would have made it difficult to play a pass around the corner. But instead of taking a touch, Tyrique George plays that quick one around the corner and takes the sting out of the ball in doing so with a deft touch, but he doesn't rest on that. He actually continues his movement to make a run towards the box and then is able to target that space. And that's all well and good, and it's something that a lot of wingers are able to do. However, Tyrique George accompanies this by playing a quick ball with his left foot, his weaker foot, which I think is quite a strong suit of his game. His weaker foot is just as good as his stronger foot, and he uses that weaker foot then to play a quick ball across the box, making an easy opportunity for his teammate to get a goal. We have him again on the right wing here versus League One opposition Cardiff. Listen, it's League One opposition, however, the principles of this play still remain pertinent because he demonstrates the exact qualities you want from a right winger and the qualities we currently don't have at Everton unless Iliman Ndiaye plays on the right wing. He starts wide here, Tyrique George, and look at the first touch. The first touch is crucial here because he takes it towards the defender, immediately putting the defender on the back foot. It's extremely positive, but Tyrique George doesn't actually then telegraph which way he's going to go with the ball. He's got a neutral body position, which means that he can go left, he can go right. As we discussed, he's got 2 strong feet. He's good with both, making it very difficult for defenders to show him down either side because he's comfortable going either way. And again, something I really like is that he's positive and doesn't hesitate with his actions, looks to beat the defender here and then puts a ball across goal. And listen, he doesn't get an assist here, but look at where the ball ends up. Most strikers would be gobbling that up every single day. And I think this is a chance where Barry would love chances like these to be flashed across the box because we know that he does get into these positions and will take those opportunities. With all of this considered, let's now look at how his inclusion changes Everton's tactics and why there's multiple different ways we can look to use Tyrique George. This was Everton's lineup against Brighton. Of course, there were some absentees that meant we couldn't play certain players in certain positions, Mikolenko being an example of that, which meant that Branthwaite had to be at left back rather than left centre back, which we obviously know that's his best position and where he thrives. However, these are some changes that Tyrique George could have made in that game on his own, and this is how it would change the tactics. Firstly, I will note that Moyes, of course, looked to get Armstrong into the team so he could move into central areas to prevent those passes into the middle from Brighton. However, what would it look like with Tyrique George in the team? Well, I think the first obvious assumption we can make is that Tyrique George is being brought in to replace Dwight McNeil. Dwight McNeil, a player that, of course, has played on the right wing under Moyes because Iliman Ndiaye has been moved over to that left wing to accommodate for Grealish's absence. So one theory could be that George comes into the right wing position, which gives Everton something important. It gives Everton two wingers that can look to drive and attack their fullbacks and take it to them, take the impetus to them and dribble with the ball and move into spaces. And if we just move up the pitch, we can see that this is what it would look like in attack. And if we just gave Tyrique George the ball here, what is important about Tyrique George is that we highlighted that his ability to move into these areas and carry the ball with effect, because him being able to move here or move inside because his left foot is equally as good gives Everton that threat and just pins back an opposition fullback. And I think the problem with Jake O'Brien at right back is that he does lack some attacking ability when coming into these areas, but that's fine with Tyrique George because his ability, his skill set, his athleticism allows him to beat players with direct play, and he will happily take up this entire zone on his own because he likes to work in the space and he doesn't really like players getting in his way, and he'll happily drive and become that progressor of the ball on the right wing. However, that's just one position that Tyrique George can play in. Now let's look at some other ideas that could be fruitful when it comes to using Tyrique George. And listen, I put Mikalenko in here because obviously when he's fit, he probably does start, which means that Branthwaite moves over to left centre-back. But I haven't changed anything else yet. However, I think Tyrique George's addition into this team gives Everton the platform to do something that maybe we won't do, maybe Moyes won't do it, and I don't think he will ever venture away from that 4-2-3-1. But this is a way you can use Tyrique George, and I would actually quite like to see it. So, some people may not be a fan of this, but for this setup, Gana Gueye has to leave the team, and Harrison Armstrong comes back in. And listen, what this is essentially is a 4-4-2, right? But it's more than that, because we've talked about Tyrique George being able to play in a central area, and with that, you can give him some freedom, meaning that even though he starts as a striker in a 4-4-2, Barry up top easily can take and pin centre-backs, giving Tyrique George the freedom just to roam in these areas in the final third, move over to the right-hand side, allowing Armstrong to then come inside, like he did against Brighton. Like David Moyes has shown that he's not afraid to play Harrison Armstrong in a wide position because he can get about and can move around in the pitch and does have the tactical flexibility and IQ to move into central areas. And from there, we have Iliman Ndiaye, who obviously comes in on that left-hand side and can attack the final third as well. And of course, this does mean that Keenan Dewsbury-Hall drops deeper. However, what it could look like is Keenan Dewsbury-Hall moves into this zone of the pitch, targeting that half space that he's been doing as an attacking midfielder already this season, and then looking to get involved in between Ndiaye and Barry. Meanwhile, James Garner comes to that single pivot as that controller of midfield and dictator of tempo, and then it just starts to look like a 4-3-3 in attack, but you've got those three forwards all given freedom and ability to do what they're best at. In this position, Barry can stay in the middle, Tyrique George can then look to play in wide areas and move to areas that he feels comfortable in, and that just brings Harrison Armstrong into the play, it brings Dewsbury Hall into the play, and suddenly you've got a really dynamic front five that can all do different jobs in and around the box, targeting different areas of the pitch and can work cohesively together. So yes, it might be a 4-4-2 in theory, but it can morph and has flexibility to then become something different in the final third. However, when out of possession, it morphs back into a 4-4-2, which we know is something that loads of Premier League teams favour, and is the mid-block is something that is formed from a 4-4-2, and teams obviously very much like it. Look at Arsenal's tactics. It's a 4-3-3 when they have the ball, but when they're out of possession, it morphs into something like this, a 4-4-2, which again isn't dissimilar to the 4-2-3-1. It's just different personnel in different areas in this part of the pitch. But I really do think Tyrique George showed his ability to link the play really well through the middle, and that's something that Everton should be looking at to replicate. However, I think that Tyrique George has shown his ability to affect things down the play and link play importantly, and this is something that Everton should be looking at and utilising as much as we can, because we can obviously play them together, Barry and George, but we don't have to. Alternatively, we can do this and give Barry a break, because obviously we are depending on him right now and he's playing a lot of football, and by the 80th minute he does look like he's getting a bit tired and a bit exhausted because he has to do a lot of running as Everton's sole striker. Tyrique George can also play through the middle, so they can be interchanged. And that brings a tactical flexibility to Everton, because we discussed earlier Tyrique George's ability to move towards the ball to receive like this from midfield allows Dewsbury Hall to then move past the striker and then make these deep runs in behind, looking for these combinations with Tyrique George, and something they did at Chelsea. And of course, it's something. This is an isolated tactical action. It's something that you can pick up from somewhere else and put it into this Everton setup, because there's just two players doing things that they're comfortable at doing anyway. So they could, of course, look to do this, and Tyrique George through the middle allows Everton to do it. And then another way Everton could look to use Tyrique George is, of course, on the left wing, and pretty much treat him like an alternative to Grealish, who of course is out for the rest of the season and we won't see him again, if not ever. But George on the left wing has showed that he can combine with players and does like this freedom to on this left-hand side, and will take that left-hand side and make it his own if we give him the keys to do it, meaning that Njai then moves back over to the right-hand side, a position I actually don't mind him in, because he's shown that wherever he is on the pitch he's comfortable, because his main talent is beating players, scoring goals and creating chances. He can do that wherever he is on the pitch, provided that it is in this final third, and Njai in these areas is very, very good for Everton. Tyrique George showed in his academy days at Chelsea and a bit for the first team that he is able to come inside with the ball and then combine with attacking midfielders, with the strikers, and that is something that Everton could maybe look to do. However, to do this, I really do feel like you need a left back who's going to take up this attacking mantle and then really keep the width. If Tyrique George moves inside, the play suddenly becomes narrow and is suddenly channeled in this corridor of the pitch, and that's very easy for teams to defend against. So to be able to properly do this, we need a left back who's going to commit to these attacking runs and make movements towards the byline. I feel like Mykolenko stops about here every time he makes a run into the opponent's half because he doesn't want to get caught short here, but you have to trust the system. You have to make these moves here to allow spaces to occur here. So I think this is something that Everton could look to do, and it'd be very interesting to see where Tyrique George fits into this team. And finally, my thoughts on this transfer, because this is rumoured to be a loan with an option to buy, and I'm the biggest fan of these types of deals. I've talked about it before. Options are better than obligations, because if it doesn't work, you send Tyrique George back to Chelsea, and then we look to readdress the problem in the summer and get permanent bodies in the time where it's cheaper to do so. However, I think that Tyrique George as an individual has shown that he's got quality at the European level against teams who probably aren't anywhere near as good as Chelsea. Well, they're definitely not. However, he can only do that because he's been put in the team in those situations. The goal we showed earlier, he scored against Fulham in the Premier League. So he's shown that he can do these things in the Premier League. And I think that he's been a victim of Chelsea going and buying so many wingers for so much money. Esteban, Garnacho, Jamie Gittins, all brought in last summer, and they already had Pedro Neto and Cole Palmer. So I think Tyrique George has been quite unlucky in that aspect. Someone else who's been unlucky, in my opinion, is Tyler Dibbling, who can't really get into this side. So I was speaking to my friend Jack earlier, and he was saying that he's worried that Tyler Dibbling is going to be a victim of Tyrique George's presence in an Everton shirt, because he blocks that pathway for Tyler Dibbling into the team. And whilst I think that Tyler Dibbling's pathway into the team has been disrupted somewhat, I feel like Tyler Dibbling does have a spot in this team because Tyrique George has that versatility. That means you can move him around. Tyrique George isn't a specialist right winger who's there to take Tyler Dibbling's spot. He's a player that only adds to the attack, and Tyler Dibbling can then look to work himself in, and then all of a sudden Everton have got a really youthful and progressive attack that can be built upon for a couple of seasons. So to summarise, I'm a fan of Tyrique George signing for Everton. Chelsea fans don't really rate him, but I think they've had it so good with all the talent they come in and see on a weekly basis that they forget that you need to develop, and the 19-year-old you see before you in Tyrique George is not the player that you're going to see in 6 years when he's 25 and in his prime. He has all the facets to become a very good Premier League player and the versatility to back that up. So I think this is a good signing for Everton and one we should get excited for. If you enjoyed it, press the like button and hit subscribe. Massively helps me out. Thank you.